Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll find out why slapping corporations with fines doesn't work. It does nothing to stop their criminal culture. Democrats in the Beltway might be shedding their corporate ties, and we'll tell you why populism might be coming back, at least in small steps. And NAFTA turned 20 recently, and we'll give you the history of the job-killing nature of NAFTA and what might lie ahead with TPP. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, remember, you've just stepped in to the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
When corporate America commits a crime, you can bet that the worst punishment is going to be a fine, a slap on the wrist. But that punishment doesn't even come close to changing the culture of crime that exists in America today. And I can assure you, this administration has done very little to change that culture of crime. I have Seth Katz here to explain why. Seth, corporate America under this administration and the administration before, with the Bush administration, the Obama administration, they've created a new culture. And the new culture seems to be that if you wear an Armani suit and a Rolex watch and you drive around in a Bentley, then you have a different standard of criminality than the rest of the world. You don't go to prison when you steal several $1 billion. You don't go to prison when you defraud people or when you sell a drug that kills people. It's a standard that's developed into a culture, hasn't it?
It is. You know what? You pay a fine and you move on with your life. You know, these companies, they pay billion and $2 billion fines, but when you look at it, that's just a small percentage of their revenue for that given year. You know, I did some research on this before we came on the air, Pap, and one of the things that really struck me was how these $2.2 billion fines were 4% of that year's annual income, let alone the income from the years during which they were engaging in this conduct.
Yeah, Seth, there was an analysis that you wrote about when you were a young attorney. I'm not suggesting you're not still young, but when you were younger, you wrote an analysis, and I think I remember reading about your Ford Pinto analysis where you said, look, here was a company that calculated how many people they could kill and still make a profit from an exploding gas can. Now, if you take that analogy and apply it here, don't you kind of have the same thing? Isn't the analysis how many billions of dollars can we make before we're caught and before we have to pay a fine, and because nobody's going to go to jail? Isn't that a similar analysis?
It is. It's a direct right-on analysis, Mike, if you ask me. They sit around a corporate boardroom. They know there's a problem with a product or a problem with their conduct. And what do? They say, well, if we get caught and we have to pay X, will we have made more over time than X? And if so, it's a simple calculation, and you can't overlook the content of it. If you were offered the ability to steal $1 million and not go to jail and just pay a fine of $500,000 but get to keep the other half, the only thing that would keep you from doing that as an individual is your individual conscience. And you might do it, you might not do it, depending on your makeup. Now, corporations don't have a conscience because they are not a living, thinking, rational being. They're the makeup of all these people who get together. And when you get together in the group setting, it's almost like putting multiple criminals in one room and rewarding them.
Once a company like, whether it's Pfizer or whether it's Johnson & Johnson, just got hit for a multi-billion-dollar fine for absolute criminality that would have put anybody else in prison. It was, bribery. It was lying to the FDA. It was pushing a drug for purposes that it never should have been sold for. A whole list of crimes. Johnson & Johnson says, we've made, $4 billion a year. So we can pay out $2 billion because they've made $4 billion a year for 10 years. So if you do the math, it's a pretty easy analysis, isn't it?
It's a real easy analysis. And the one thing I want to follow up on, Mike, that you just said, the money for the fine doesn't come out of the CEO's benefits. It doesn't come out of his salary or her bonus or her pocket. It comes from the shareholders. It means less money for the shareholders, but the executive compensation stays the same. It goes up every year in this country. The bonuses that the higher level executives at all these companies, and it's not just pharma companies, it's oil companies, it's tech companies, they're all involved in this because of what you call, Pap, the culture that's been developed. If we can make more than we have to pay, it's an easy business decision.
Well, I mean, if we just look at just this past year, Pfizer, Lilly, Johnson & Johnson, KBR, I can't even remember all of them. Simon, I could go on forever. Of course, yes, all of the banking industry almost, all of them have paid these exorbitant fines, but some of them haven't even had to plead guilty to do it. Great example. A story you covered, I think last year, you or Mike covered, where we talked about the idea that you had you had a bank in international bank that was actually laundering money for terrorists, laundering money for crime cartels, for drug cartels. They were caught. The documents were there. The papers were clear. They had actually done this. Witnesses were testifying against them. Whistleblowers came in and said, yeah, I actually participated in that. I was told to participate in that. Nobody went to prison for that, where you had a major bank saying, yeah, we're going to do this. And you know what they did? They paid a big fine, and they realized, gee whiz, we can make money again. When all the dust clears, we can make money again selling, doing the crime work for terrorists, doing the crime work for drug cartels. When all the dust settles down, we'll simply do it again. Isn't that kind of the problem here?
It's a big problem, Pap. I mean, if you look at the way this country is going and trending, it's much better to be a corporation than an individual. You can buy your way out of criminal liability without ever having the risk of prison, without ever having to lose your freedom, or in the case of a corporation, forced receivership. You can donate as much money as you want to a political party, to a political candidate. An individual is capped. I mean, the way that the government and the way that the Supreme Court are treating corporations vis-a-vis individual rights is astounding.
It's not even just corporations. How about this story we just saw, where wealth kept this disgusting little brat out of prison because they said, you know what, he's spoiled. He's a spoiled brat. The parents are multi-millionaires, and he suffers from something called affluenza. And he runs over and kills 4 people. He's, drunk at the time, kills 4 people. And rather than going to prison like anybody else would, this kid gets a free pass. Why? Because the judge there's no other way to put it. You follow the money on that. The judge was impressed with the wealth. Seth Katz, thank you for joining me. Keep up what you do. Maybe we can do, in our little part of the world, we can at least push back. Thank you for joining me. Howard, the NAFTA trade deal has been in place for about 20 years, and it's responsible for sending millions of U.S. jobs out of the country. Now there's this new, even worse trade deal that our president has secretly been promoting, and it raises questions about, day one, we're hearing that he is a champion of the people. Day 2, he's killing jobs in the ugliest kind of way by this thing called a trade deal that really isn't a trade deal. I'm interested to know your take on it. You have been a huge supporter of this president, as I have. What's your take when you see what's unfolding here?
Well, Mike, since the past is prologue, let's take a look at NAFTA, which was 20 years ago, put in place by President Clinton and by Bob Rubin from Wall Street and by corporate America. It was opposed severely by the unions who warned us what was going to happen. The results of 20 years of NAFTA have been thousands of factories in the United States have closed, 1 million jobs have gone south to Mexico, hundreds of cities have been decimated, think Detroit. The results have been in Mexico that outfits like ADM dumped their corn into Mexico. They wiped out the peasant farmers down there. Walmart moved in big time, wiped out small businesses. Those people took on low-wage jobs that came from America. The winners were corporate America, ADM, Walmart, the usual suspects in America.
This has been a gold mine where corporate
Totally.
America gets all the gold and we get the shaft. Now, what's bothering me about this, and the reason I talk to you about this, you have been so active in U.S. politics at the very highest level. I know we have done interviews where you've talked and supported this president. Isn't this the underbelly about what this man is really all about? And I want to preface it by saying this. Follow the money on this story. The day Obama got into office, understand, it was the Penny Pritzker money that put him there. It was the Robert Rubin money that put him there. It was the drug industry money that put him there. This TPP has nothing to do, really, out of 29 chapters, whether there are 5 chapters that have to do with trade, kind of. This is like a pigs at the trough feeding for Wall Street and all these other supporters of the president, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is. Of course, it was put in place initially by Bush, but that was in 2008, in his last year. If you look at the essence of this thing, you find it in the secrecy. There's been no public discussion of this. The Congress has not even been given copies of this agreement until recently. The people who have seen it have been the administration and 600 corporate trade advisors. Now, why the secrecy? The secrecy is because there would be public outrage if the public knew what was in this. And President Obama is now asking Congress to fast track this through the Congress, which means that in Congress you get no hearings, essentially. You get no negotiations. You get a straight up or down, yes or no vote. And frankly, you're right. I was a big supporter, full disclosure. I was a big supporter of the president. But let's go down the list here.
Food safety, no question. Everybody who's analyzed this says food safety is at risk because the regulations are such that we have to fall to the lowest common denominator. Right. If Pango is part of this agreement and Pango doesn't have food safety regulations, then we have to comply with their non-regulation. Fracking. Already we're seeing cases where in Canada, foreign oil companies are suing Canadian sovereigns and saying, you have laws that say we can't frack. You know what? We're going to sue you about it. And they've sued one area in Quebec for $250 million. Jobs, you have U.S. corporations that are going to get bonuses. They're going to get tax breaks for sending jobs out of this country. Drug prices. How about this? We're not going to be able to control drug prices at all under this new agreement. As a matter of fact, you're going to give the drug industry the opportunity to distribute their drug for a longer period of time by holding the patent longer, and they're going to be able to interfere with the generic drugs moving onto the market. And we're not going to be able to limit them in any kind of way on prices. So banksters, same thing. Wall Street gets this free ride because all of the regulations that we've kind of put in place, they're not really in place, but that we've talked about putting in place because of the theft that took place, the $10 trillion theft that Wall Street pulled off. Those regulations we're not even going to be able to put in place. I don't know how it is that this president can say he was a populist. He gave the impression that he was a true populist, and now look at what's happened here. To me, it's over with my thinking things are going to get better with this president. I don't know about you. What's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is that this entire thing is a government-corporate partnership that is nothing more or less than corporate protectionism. Under these provisions, the usual suspects win: the banks, the oil industry, the manufacturers, big pharma, big business, and the politicians who rely on corporations for contributions for their campaigns. The losers are the American public. We're going to increase job loss in America. You're going to increase the divide between the rich and the poor. You're going to increase the corporate control of our daily lives. The question is, where's the press? This came out from WikiLeaks. Now,
very important point, Howard. You've come on this show and you've talked about how the media has become dysfunctional because it's owned by corporations. I remember you did the story last year where we talked about that in the mid 80s, about 50 or 60 independent organizations own the media. Now it's down to 4. So corporate media has no interest in telling this story, and you've stood by that position for a very long time, and we're seeing it right here, aren't we?
Well, Mike, I've always been opposed to WikiLeaks because of leaking things that might have to do with national security. I was in the military intelligence. I was in the Army Security Agency. I know the importance of American secrets, but I got to tell you, I am with WikiLeaks on this one because the press, the political leaders, no one has covered this story. No one is touching this story. And then we wouldn't be talking about it now.
The corporate media wants this. I mean,
yeah, absolutely, because you're not going to see it on 60 Minutes because 60 Minutes is owned by corporate America. You're not going to see it in the New York Times because they're owned by corporate America. The political leaders are not going to raise the issue because they're owned by corporate America.
Well,
so
what we have is a situation, we're going to lose jobs, we're going to have Detroits popping up all over the country because what the heart of this is, the very heart, is that American corporations get treated to bonuses, tax breaks, subsidies of all kinds to send jobs out of this country, to send manufacturing out of this country, to destabilize unions in this country, and actually help the middle class disappear. Howard Nations, thank you for joining me. We're going to have a great year this year. We're going to be talking about stories this important every single week, and you are always the person to bring them to us. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power in programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable. With midterm elections coming up later this year, Democrats in the Beltway are starting to realize that they can't win by aligning themselves with Wall Street bankers. Instead, they're trying to move back to the left towards true populism. Joining me now to talk about this is attorney Joe Cochette. Joe, it appears that this new sense of populism may be splitting the Democratic Party, and I think that may be a positive thing. We see what happened with de Blasio. We hear Elizabeth Warren out on front of these issues, Sherrod Brown, Sheldon Whitehouse, Jeff Merkley. All of these people are saying, look, we have to reconsider what we are as a Democratic Party, and Elizabeth Warren may be the person that has it right. What's your take on it?
There's absolutely no question about that, Mike, but it's more than Elizabeth Warren. As you mentioned, other people. There's people on the streets in Los Angeles, as you just saw in New York, in Washington, in Philadelphia, Chicago, everywhere. There's even people in the state of Texas, believe it or not, contrary to what that governor thinks. There is a movement going on that it's about time in coming, to be frank with you, because what people are seeing is they're not seeing an economy that's getting better. They're seeing an economy that's getting better for really this trite phrase, the 1%, but that's what it's all about. When is the last time you saw someone from Wall Street go to jail? It doesn't happen. I don't mean to be so blunt, But that's the thievery that's going on in our country.
You, just like I, probably had to read Lawrence Goodwin, who probably has written more about what real populism means than any writer that I'm familiar with. Maybe Howard Zinn or Chalmers Johnson have written equal amounts. But Lawrence Goodwin says you can have an economy that's crashing. You can have people out of jobs. They can be losing their houses. You can have a profit ratio that's so irregular that it's obscene. But nothing happens to bring real populism in the country without a real movement that simply has to be a grassroots movement. It doesn't take place on the Beltway. What is your take on what Goodwin had to say about that?
Well, he's right on the money, and as a matter of fact, there is a movement that's starting, and you saw it in New York City over the past several months with the election of de Blasio. But as I just pointed out, you're going to see it everywhere. There must be a movement. There is a movement. I see it every day out on the streets. You stand on a line at either your A&P grocery store or your Safeway, and you're going to see a movement, because what you're going to see are prices are starting to go through the roof for various different reasons, and those reasons are really very simple. It's all about, and I don't want to use the phrase big business because I'm all in favor of big business, but I'm in favor of big business that is fair and true to the working man and woman. And what they're seeing out on the street is unfavorable conditions that are not working for the average middle class, which is diminishing every single day. Take a look at our education system. Here in California, kids now have to take 6 years to get through 4 years college because they can't get the classes. They're being cut back because we're putting more money into football programs than we are into classes. So it's our priorities. And when I say football programs, I want to make sure you understand I'm all in favor of football. But football today is becoming a Wall Street big business in our big football programs.
Joe, it's pretty easy to understand what people like Sherrod Brown and Merkley and Sheldon Whitehouse and Bernie Sanders are talking about. When they talk about populism, it's a populism that empowers the idea of unions, for example. It empowers the worker. It talks about cutting, we're not going to cut Medicare. We're going to make sure that insurance companies play by the rules, that big banks play by the rules. We're not going to allow hospital corporations to rape us anymore unnecessarily for health care. We're going to allow colleges, as you point out, to prosper. We're going to have an education system that prospers. These are all just basic, simple ideas that when you add them all together, this is the message of the new populism that I'm hearing. But nevertheless, as you and I speak, still in the Beltway, they don't seem to understand that movement's taking place in this country, do they?
And the reason for that is very simple. It's called money. You see, money corrupts. I don't care, Democrat, Republican, whatever. Look at what this Obama administration has done, and I'm a big supporter of theirs, but look at how they have failed to rein in Wall Street. They have failed to rein in big money that comes off K Street. For those of you that are not, for those people that are not familiar with K Street, that is just building after building of lobbyists with multi-millions of dollars in cash contributions, check contributions, fundraising ability. So when your average member of the House or the Senate walks into those parties, they are taken aback with the largesse that is put upon them. That's the problem with our system. It is bought and paid for by lobbyists. The average person on the street in Atlanta, Georgia, can't walk up to their member of the House and hand them a big check and say, look, I want to throw a party for you. The average person on the street in New Orleans, Denver, Albuquerque, New Mexico, they don't have this ability. They're lucky if they can make their rent check and pay for their food for their children at the end of the month.
Well, when we listen to what happens, if we analyze what happens with the populist movement, Goodwin, again, I keep coming back to him because he had some great ideas. He said what moved the populist movement in the 20s and the 30s was that you had grassroots organizations. You had farmers that were going town to town talking about the need for people to regain control of the government. You had you had a movement that talked about the idea of building an economy from the bottom up rather than from the trickle down. From the trickle up down. And so, but nevertheless, we don't really see that nowadays unless we focus on what occurs in the social media. There's no grassroots turf kind of movement that Goodwin says you have to really affect a populist movement, because truly, as you just pointed out, the money is so big that the Beltway is completely isolated from the rest of the country.
But I disagree with you, and I disagree with him to this extent. There is a movement, and we're seeing it in our inner cities. It is now growing out. I want to comment on your farm issue. You see, you're right. We did have farmers that stood up in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and rallied together as a movement. And I don't mean to be facetious about this, but we don't have farmers anymore. What we have today in America are corporate farms, the large farms that are run literally by Wall Street. So you don't have those little farmers. What you do have, though, is you have the workers on the streets of every little city, little main street, right up to your big cities, that are now looking around and saying, hey, wait a minute. And I see those movements forming, Mike, and that's why the Elizabeth Warrens and the other people you pointed out, Tammy Baldwin and others, are making such a loud voice. When I say making a voice, their voice is becoming louder and louder, and you're going to see people now, people who were comfortable in the late 1900s, they hit the new century, 2000, and you know what happened in 2007. Banks started selling mortgages as securities to pension funds, teachers' pension funds, firemen, police pension funds, that they have now awoken to find out that these mortgages were underwater, all created by Wall Street. So now you have the average person that owns a home realizing that since 2007, they were hoodwinked by Wall Street.
You know, there's an idea that sometimes people just fall into a point to where they resign themselves to the idea that they simply aren't going to get ahead, that they simply have to live with the conditions as they are, that they have to live with less money, that they have to scrape to get medical care. And individuals resign themselves to this is simply what we have to live with. Now, as I hear you talk, you're saying you don't believe that's happened in the United States, that you see signs that of just the opposite. Do you think maybe this president is getting the message that he damn sure better step out of the Beltway, and he better reconnect with those people who had him elected twice?
There's absolutely no question in my mind that he and everyone, his advisors around him, realize they have to reconnect now. Look at the Affordable Care Act as an example of what they did to him, what Wall Street did to that act. You know what they did to it. Look at what they're trying to do to Medicare. So I think today I have great hope in the young people in our country, because I see young kids starting to stand up, take an active interest. We're going to have immigration reform, whether the Republicans like it or not. This is a country of immigrants. And I see people stepping forward now for the first time in the past 10, 20 years. The word hope was used when he ran the first time. I believe the hope. Many young people believed the hope, and then everybody became disillusioned when the facts truly came out that nothing had changed on Wall Street. I think Obama attempted to do it. He just didn't have the will at the time to do it. I think that's changed now in the second term. I think he's going to get back out on the streets. I see him, at least now, going back to Main Street and getting away from Wall Street.
I hope you're right. I want to continue this conversation and have you and I have a discussion about the TPP that he's backing secretly right now that very, very much should concern everybody. I mean, if you look at the TPP, let's continue this discussion in our next interview and consider really what does the TPP say about the intent of this president for the next 2 years? I'm glad to hear you're optimistic about it, Joe. In some sense, I am optimistic. But, optimism is great, but I'd rather see some real results. Joe Cochette, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
Seems like almost every day new information emerges about Chris Christie and the scandals that surround him. It's starting to take its toll on the governorship, and it's starting to take its toll on the Republican Party in general. Joining me now to talk about the impact is Washington, D.C. attorney David Haynes, who's been following this story from the beginning. David, you're following this story. You've covered this story for us previously. The Chris Christie story continues to grow. It doesn't look like one that's going to go away. I remember a conversation I had with you where you said that it appears now that the predictable thing is happening, and that is that all the people working underneath the guy at the top are saying, can this guy protect me now? And truthfully, he can't protect him, so they're kind of leaving the ship, aren't they?
They totally are. Resignations are continuing to mount up, including another one this weekend, and now David Wildstein is directly in opposition to Chris Christie's position, and they're going to be slugging it out in New Jersey, and this does not look good for Governor Christie at all, or certainly for any hopes in 2016. The question now really is, can he even retain the governor's seat? Not so much will he be the next president.
Well, you have newspapers up there saying, look, Governor, if you did lie, if you for 2 hours stood in front of a camera and told the media, A, you didn't know anything about it, B, none of your people were involved. Now, understand, this is where he started. He started by saying none of my people were involved until the Wildstein story came out. So what is your take on how these cases fall apart for a politician? You're there in Washington, D.C. You've covered these stories before. You see it all the time. What is the anatomy of how these stories start to fall apart?
Well, it really is snowballing here for Chris Christie. He's in damage control. He's fighting for his political life. He's been in denial. At this point now, they're appearing to parse words. David Wildstein's attorney lodged a letter Friday afternoon to the Port Authority that indicates that the governor did have information that while the lanes were shut down as to why they were shut down. And now they're parsing words that he had no information before, and they're trying to backtrack on the press conference. So we've seen this happen before. Now already discussions are starting about the GOP field and who else could be coming in, and we're hearing other names as Chris Christie's stock is in free fall.
Well, what we see is almost a pile-on by people. First of all, don't you think we're going to see a repeat of the same kind of platform and field of candidates that we saw from the Republicans last time? And doesn't this just promote it further? I mean, this is the guy, along with Jeb Bush, who are going to be front runners. Now, all of a sudden, they're saying 2016 may not be far enough off for them to forget, for people to forget that, A, he lied about the fact that his people were not involved. Let's not forget that. B, he then took, for 2 hours, if you believe what some of these underlings are saying right now, he lied about what he knew and when he knew it. And now add to that, David, what is your take on this Mayor Zimmer, who has said, listen, you want another ugly story? This guy was holding up our relief money after Hurricane Sandy, holding up our money in exchange for a reasonable effort, a reasonable effort on our part to try to make a development take place that should not have ever taken place. And she says, look, I'm willing to plead. I'm willing to take an oath on it. I'm willing to take a lie detector test on it.
Exactly. I mean, that's the most disturbing part. Is this is a pattern in practice, it appears. This is not an isolated incident of the George Washington Bridge. You just shut down a couple of lanes, which is the most ridiculous thing. But why would his employees and the staff believe that they could do that? Now more information is coming out about the Sandy financial aid abuse, and that this is a pattern in practice that Governor Christie is engaging in up here in New Jersey, of political patronage and what they would view as hardball. And the situation in Hoboken, they wanted money for a particular developer, Rockefeller Developers, on 3 square blocks in Hoboken. And they're holding up Sandy aid because of that, millions of dollars, and he's passing out this patronage around the state. and more information is coming out now of people who have been victimized.
I thought it was interesting that Mayor Zimmer, when she made a statement, when first of all Christie's camp comes out and say, Mayor, you're lying about it, and she says, okay, you think I'm lying? Let's take a lie detector test. Let me swear under oath, and will you do the same thing? Of course, they refused. But when Zimmer started telling her story, it's kind of what you just mentioned, David, is that this guy, you had Christie that was supposed to be the person that ran all the corrupt criminals out of government up in New Jersey. Mayor Zimmer said, I really respected that. Mayor Zimmer was a Democrat who said, I really respected that. And now this whole story just kind of makes that image, that mystique of Christie being the guy to fight corruption, all that is disappearing, isn't it?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Mayor Zimmer, even a Democrat, supported Governor Christie because of some of the corruption and the cleanup that he had done in that area, which is riddled with crime and public corruption. But now she's seeing, unfortunately, he's taking a playbook out of the defendants who he prosecuted, and very sad. And, of course, the people of New Jersey have been the victims.
David, I think of some things that probably have already happened. I think of the criminal conduct that's already occurred. Probably at this point, some of these underlings, the Wildstein types and the people that are resigning day to day, they probably have already engaged into some type of criminal cover-up. Now, that is a felony, isn't it? I mean, the criminal cover-up is a felony. Obstruction of justice is a felony. And so don't these people have to say to themselves, is this worth it? Is this worth my career in my life to lie for this corrupt politician who's nothing short of a political mobster? I mean, if you put a fedora on this guy's head, he starts looking more like Al Capone, a fedora and a bat in his hand, and all of a sudden you've got an Al Capone kind of character here. Why would these people ever not begin lawyering up and start trying to make deals?
Well, and that's absolutely right, and they have. And as you said, that's what we've seen play out time and again, whether it's David Wildstein now has clearly come out. The Christie administration puts out a memo about Wildstein and accusations of him back in high school that supposedly a social studies teacher accused him of being deceptive. Pat, when they're putting out those sorts of talking points, Governor Christie's team is desperate. And David Wildstein has lawyered up. He's written a letter to the Port Authority. He wants his legal fees paid. And, of course, that's the letter where he is making the accusation that Christie knew what was going on when the lanes were closed down. So this is going from bad to worse.
David, if you really consider this, the strength that the party has had, that the Republicans have had in the past, is they beat the hell out of the Democrats in governor races and in state legislature, because the Democrats were brain dead. It was almost like bubblegum brain, where they couldn't figure out that you have to get control of the state houses, you have to get control of governorships, because all politics starts local. Now all of a sudden you have Chris Christie, who is the chairman of the Governors Association nationally. What does this do to the Republican Party in general? Does it have an effect?
Absolutely, it has an effect. He's probably the highest profile candidate for 2016, as you said, head of the Republican National Governors Association. And in addition to that, now we have Bob McDonnell in Virginia, who's on federal indictment charges for fraud and corruption, for taking bribes, essentially, in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He was another golden boy of the Republican Party. Chris Christie, now the truth is coming out about him. You can bet that the Republican and the GOP senior statesmen among the party, they're scrambling. The field is wide open now, and that's not what they wanted for 2016.
But look at this field, David. It's almost you have to do, party leadership with the Republicans are such that you almost have to decide, do you want to go with the lunatic or do you want to go with the grifter, the criminal? I mean, just go down there. I mean, if you start really considering who these people are that are at the forefront of leadership, on the lunatic side, of course, you've got the Sarah Palins, you've got the Huckabees, you've got Bobby Jindal there in Louisiana. That's the leadership of this company on the lunatic side. On the grifter side, I mean, you've got Christie, you've got Vitter, David Vitter, my God, in charge of leadership for the party. He's known as the Washington pimp. I mean, had more prostitutes going through his office than he did actual politicians. So at some point, don't you have to decide who what's the right party for me? Is the Republican Party even viable for the average card-carrying Republican? People are asking those kinds of questions right now, aren't they?
Absolutely. It's a total identity crisis right now for the party. They don't know which way to go. You have the Tea Party faction, as you said. You've got some of the big business folks who are seem to be more behind a Christie or maybe a McDonald. Now those options are out, and now they're bringing up Jeb Bush. Another Bush? Really?
Yeah. Well,
this is where they're going?
And the Jeb Bush story was never really told in Florida about his connection to the S&L crisis, but you can bet he's afraid to throw his hat in the ring because he knows that's a hell of a story. So decide lunatics, or do you go with the grifter criminals? That's kind of where the party is right now, and it's not a place any national political party wants to be in. David, thank you for joining me. Let's follow this story as it develops. I can promise you it will continue to develop. This story does not go away. Thank you for joining me, David.
Thank you, Pat.
The Pap Attack.
Well, the train wreck to me is what's getting ready to happen January and February over budget talks. There was this, I know you saw this great article written this week by Gary Young, Guardian. If you want great information, you have to go to a foreign newspaper, and Guardian is it. He pointed out that Charles Munger, this is a disgusting story. He pointed out Charles Munger, this billionaire chairman of the Berkshire Hathaway, was in front of a crowd. And he said, he told the crowd there was no need to bail out poor, hungry people from an economic standpoint because he put it, this is a quote, "Life is a little harder than it used to be, so just suck it up, buddy, and cope with it." That was his quote. In the same breath, one of America's new Wall Street cretins pointed out that it was critically important that taxpayers continue to subsidize other fat cat Wall Street types, already to the tune of $13 trillion, but they want more. He told his audience that they should be thankful. They should, swear to God, they should thank God for bank bailouts. In other words, bailouts for billionaire Wall Street criminals seems just fine. But coming to the aid of America's middle class or coming to the aid of America's poor was bad judgment, according to the Charles Munger billionaire crowd. Isn't that a perfect name for this guy, Charles Munger? Munger and his psychopath pals on Wall Street are in a new rehabilitation mode, where they're reasserting that greed is good for all of us because they see they're getting hammered in public opinion, so they're trying to rebuild why greed is good for all of us. When Munger told his audience that poor people simply need to suck it up and get over it and go on with their dismal life, what he was telling them is that they needed to adapt to the new form of capitalism, something that we haven't seen since the 1930s, that's destroying America again. In other words, middle class and poor Americans need to adapt, but Wall Street, here's the irony, well, they reserve the right to continue their dysfunctional, predatory, disastrous race to the bottom, these reptiles adapting, never having to really adapt to anything. Poor people in middle class, well, they have to adapt. But Wall Street sees no need because middle class and poor taxpayers are always there for them when their incompetent, irrational, criminal corporate MBAs make incredibly bad decisions, knowingly, reckless, bad decisions. We're always there for them, so they don't have to adapt. The most troubling aspect about the Munger story is that Munger seems to be getting cooperation from the huge new numbers of Wall Street Democrats, and we're going to be talking about that today. Here's the background. 47 million Americans lost food stamp benefits in part because the Democrats, or what used to be called the so-called People's Party, have been quick to support the notion that greed is good and that the more we give to the top, the better off we're going to be at the bottom. The big lie that media Republicans, and now, see, I used to just talk about this was just a talking point for Republicans. This used to be something I talked about when I talked about the Ronald Reagan Republicans. But now Wall Street Democrats continue to sell that big lie. Buddy, they are full tilt selling the big lie. Gary Young, in a great article, again, from The Guardian, his article, How America is Killing the Poor. It reminded me that according to the Gallup polls, 1 in 5 Americans, your neighbors, say that they had times just in the last year where they didn't have enough damn money to put food on the table for their families, and they went without eating. The interesting point about Young's observation is that it's not just Republicans who want to continue taking benefits away from middle class and poor Americans. The only difference is that Republicans want bigger cuts than Democrats. When there should be no cuts at all, there should be increases taking place according to real politicians like Bernie Sanders. As we move in the budget discussions in January and February, Rick, the very thing you're talking about, what we're going to begin seeing is that Wall Street Democrats, along with Republicans, are going to continue squeezing the middle class and squeezing the poor with more Social Security cuts, more Medicare cuts, and more safety net cuts in general. And do not believe corporate media when they spin this, or Democrats when they spin this as saying this is a Republican issue. It's not. Democrats are going to argue, gee whiz, golly gee, we had to do this in order to compromise with the recalcitrant Republicans. Republicans are going to argue that, gee whiz, Democrats were willing to participate in all kinds of cuts because they finally see this is the only way to save our economy. Those are a couple of the talking points. And when you drill right down to the heart of the issue of cuts for the middle class and more cuts for the poor, those cuts have nothing at all to do with economic truth. And they have everything to do with ugly, disgusting political theater that both the Democrats and the Republicans are already playing out on television. Democrats understand that Hillary Clinton is going to be asking for big money again, like her husband did from Wall Street, just like we saw the Obama administration do. And never forget, most politicians, D or R, have no sense of shame where it comes to groveling for money. And the losers are the people who need help the most. As you watch the political theater over the staged budget, it's staged. First of all, it's a staged budget fight. There's no fight here. But as you watch this thing that's already been well choreographed, as you watch it unfold in January and February, understand the corporate media will never report that the Democrats have a goal that's not much different from the goal of the Republicans. You might remember the incident where Bill Clinton was caught on camera with a hot mic talking about the need for Democrats to push for Social Security reform. Clinton's apologetic big crocodile tear explanation was that event, well, it ought to leave you cold, first of all, but for weeks after, he caught on to parroting talking points that sounded more like Republican ideology than intelligent, truthful economic planning. The facade theater that's already been, this is all done. I mean, I'm talking about it now. It's done, ladies and gentlemen. So I don't believe it's not done. They've already given it away. The facade theater that unfolds in January and February may at least accomplish something if you are honest with yourself. If you're not a damn Obama bot who cannot be critical when we have to be critical. It's going to allow progressives to finally admit that in 2013 and 2014, there's going to be little difference in how we distinguish the differences between Democrats and Republicans on issues about distribution of wealth in America. You're kidding yourself if you believe that nonsense that the discussion is going to be taking place in budget talks in January and February has anything to do with real, genuine, bona fide economic concerns. It's not about that. It's about the money grab. It's about the political groveling. It's about the fact we have Wall Street Democrats who no longer have the damn courage or interest to stand up for America. It's not just the brain-dead, bonehead Republicans anymore. It's simply about political ideology. And right now, this moment in history, it's difficult to tell any differences in the ideology between Democrats or Republicans except on social issues, on issues like gender or immigration or handguns. Yes, Democrats do better with that. But just like Rick Outzen said to begin, what we see is misdirection that's taken place already. Talking about issues that have nothing to do with the fact that you got families that can't feed their families. We have a middle class that's disappeared. Where it comes to matters that really have the greatest effect on the typical American family, such as core economic issues, the Democrats have left the room shoulder to shoulder with Republicans. Now, not all of them. There's still a few heroes out there, believe me. But their numbers are dwindling. The typical American retiree today is unable to rely on pensions or planned retirement and is going to be required to live on Social Security, now averaging maybe $1,200 a month. They rely on Medicare the most, and Medicaid recipients are children, for the most part, living in poverty or adults with significant disabilities. Attitudes about basic issues such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid can best be reflected in virtually all of the polls that show a solid 70 to 75% of Americans believe Social Security should not be tampered with at all. It should not be cut. If anything, it should be increased. But Democrats in the Beltway, just like Republicans, they're blinded by the money that they're getting from Wall Street. Conservative teabag type Republicans have already won this battle, ladies and gentlemen. It's over. All you're going to see in January and February is practiced theater. Hardly a day goes by now where some Democratic leader isn't suggesting either directly or in some damn code language that we got to take more away from the middle class and the poor and give it to America's billionaire elites by way of tax cuts, subsidies, and tax loopholes that make it virtually impossible for billionaires not to become multi-billionaires. Expect to hear the president and Democratic leadership using terms like long-term obligations to Medicare and Social Security, which is merely code word for cuts are coming and they don't need to come. Expect Democratic leadership to be telling us that they have to negotiate. They can't be viewed as the party unwilling to compromise. That's their talking point already. Expect to hear Democrats on Sunday talk shows making it clear that in their minds all the issues are on the negotiating table, including taking away more from the middle class, taking away more from the poor, and taking that same money and giving it to billionaires. It's all code word, code talk for the fact they've already given it away. Listen carefully as Wall Street Democrats such as Schumer and Durbin and Warner tell us that Democrats have to give entitlements away in order to get cooperation on revenues. How ridiculous. These are the new Wall Street Democrats beholding to Erskine Bowles, Alan Simpson, Robert Rubin, Tim Geithner, Larry Summers on economic issues that most concern the American public. It's virtually impossible to recognize any Democratic blood running through the veins of Dianne Feinstein or Max Baucus or Joe Manchin or Chris Coons, or Tim Carper. The train wreck sellout is going to be taking place during a time when Americans more than ever need federal safety net programs. Only around 30% of all jobs in America even offer pensions, while health care and housing continues to skyrocket. If you actually believe that the Democrats won the shutdown and the great days are ahead, you watch what happens in January and February. Pay attention to what happens in the next 60 days. And you're going to see not only the golden years for our retirees disappear, you're going to see your future disappearing. Dollar by dollar that's going to be moved to the billionaire Wall Street elites that are handing out money in big bags to politicians who will speak their stupid talk. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or at Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire. Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, host of Ring of Fire on Free Speech TV. The corporate-controlled media rakes in millions of dollars in profit every year by only telling you half of the story. They're at the mercy of their corporate sponsors, and they refuse to take on corporations that kill, maim, and harm consumers. Here at Free Speech TV, we don't have shareholders. We don't answer to corporate America, and we don't pull any punches. Our loyalty is to the viewers, and our viewers are the ones that help keep Free Speech TV alive. Free Speech TV doesn't take corporate money, and that's why your financial support is so important to us. Viewer voices, not corporate sponsors, fuel Free Speech TV and drive many of our programming decisions. You can help protect Free Speech TV with your donation. Free Speech TV airs independent news and views for independent thinkers like you. Our people-powered programs demonstrate what's possible in our democracy when we unite as workers, as students, as artists, as parents, and partners in progress. More people means more power. Each donation brings more power and programs and more possibilities for change. Our programming equips viewers with vital tools, resources, contacts, and examples of how to collectively build alternative, sustainable solutions to serious community problems. Please donate now and bring these organizing tools into your community. Everyone should have access to news and information that's forming the world around them. Our goal is to keep you and everybody involved. We aim to reach every viewer possible because we're all in this together. Go online to freespeech.org and help support independent, honest news journalism. Your support helps keep information flowing, and together we can hold the corporate media more accountable.